Ha 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 ha. It's no secret. We all want to be closer to our Shamisen idols. And today you can, for we have just released Signature Bachi. These bachi are shaped, weighted, and balanced to the exact specifications given by the hottest Shamisen stars. Firstly, we have Signature Bachi from Masahiro Nitta and Yutaka Oyama, as well as Bachido's first Signature Bachi. The specs of this bachi are based on my most favorite bekko bachi. I got this one several years ago, and everything about it was so me. It fit my hand perfectly, the weight, the balance, all was so delightful. In fact, I loved it too much. I got nervous about breaking the shell, so most of the time it sat in a drawer. Is that true love? Maybe not. Thus, when I was invited to make a signature bachi, I based all of the specs on this one, and now we have an exact duplicate, and I couldn't be happier. Now, one thing to keep in mind is this bachi fits my hand perfectly. It might not fit everybody else's. And a good example of that is Yutaka Oyama's bachi. Like Reigen Fuji, his handle is thinner than average, and I guess that's meant to make it more agile, easier for sweet licks and such riffage. Personally, I've tried using this and I really wanted to get comfortable with it, and it never really felt that natural. Especially when I picked up my favorite bachi again. Compared to that, this just really fits like a glove for me. So moral of the story, the bachi of your favorite shamisen idol might not fit your hand the best. But it can't hurt to try, am I right? Yes. However, there is one thing we're able to adjust, and that's the flexibility. Signature bachi are made with the synthetic shell Neoko. Now, I'm not sure if Neoko is in full bekko bachi or other types. I have to imagine that different producers have their own proprietary ingredients in their shell. I'm not sure. But what I do know is that Neoko is just like real bekko in the way that you can sand it to adjust the flexibility and get the right tone and flex you desire. One thing to note, changing the flex does change the tone. The more stiff it is, the more duller but booming tone it'll have. The thinner it is, the more delicate but thin, weaker tone it'll have with percussive strikes. When you receive a new signature bachi, the thickness of the edge will be just under 2 millimeters thick. Now that's pretty thick, and for most people, it'll be too stiff and uncomfortable to play. However, some people do like wielding a chunky bachi. Thus, it's made at the thicker end to satisfy them, and the rest of us can thin it down to just the right amount of flex we desire. At the end of this video, I'll show you how you can sand the bachi yourself. Quick warning though, it is possible to make the bachi too thin, and I know because I did it myself. This was my first time sanding Neoko, so I learned for all of us. The best approach is to sand a bit, polish it, try it out on your shamisen, and if it's still too stiff, sand a bit more, polish again, repeat until you get the flexibility you desire. Generally, for shamisen bachi, the edge will be about 1 millimeter thick here. Well, this is a 0.5 millimeter. And not only is it super flexible, but it affects the tone as well. Let's have a listen and find out. I will start with Yutaka Oyama's bachi. This hasn't been sanded yet, so it's still at the thick, almost 2 millimeters. So that's the tone for that. I'm not sure if we can hear, but it's the tone is a bit duller compared to thinner bachi, but it's definitely powerful and has a very booming tone. Now compared to that, let's have a listen to the very thin 0.5 millimeter edge. Nice. Definitely both the tone and the flex, of course, are different. Flex is nice, tone at this thickness, it's very delicate, almost too delicate. It's very nice for softer strikes. Very clear and delicate, but especially for harder percussive strikes, for me there's just a little too much high frequency clicking when hitting the skin, and especially the Ichinoi-to. Although it's still very loud, compared to the other bachi, the tone is a bit weak in a way. If it were just a bit thicker, there would be enough stiffness to give kind of a really solid boom. Again, generally, bachi tend to be about 1 millimeter thick, and that tends to be just enough thickness to give good flexibility and a nice strength in the tone. But certainly there's no right answer, so it's well worth experimenting and see what kind of tone and flexibility you like. That's one thing I really like about these bachi, is that you're able to adjust the flexibility to just the way you like it. Signature Bachi. Swing one today. These are the tools we need to sand this bachi. First, we have our block of wood. The block should be completely flat on the bottom and ideally flat on the sides too. Top side doesn't matter. This is what we put the sandpaper on as we sand the bachi. Next, we have our rubber eraser. I use this with the finer sandpapers at the very end to kind of get the edge smooth and nice. Next, we have sandpapers. Start with 120 grit, wet dry sandpaper so we can use water, not get dusty. 220, 320, 400, 600, 1000, 1200, 1500, and 2000. And after 2000, we can use some plastic polishing compound to get it really shiny. Next, you'll want some water to dip the sandpaper in. Yes, this picture is really dirty from years of oily woods and other residues and such, but it still is water. And then a rag to wipe off any residue or such to get things clean. And lastly, this isn't required, but it's really nice to have calipers. This will show the thickness of where you currently are as you're sanding. Let's start by measuring the initial thickness of the bachi, just at the tip. So as we can see, it's just under 2 millimeters. Now before sanding, I recommend just try out the bachi with your shamisen. If you like the tone and flexibility of the original thickness, then just leave it as is and enjoy. But if you find it to be too stiff or you don't like the tone, then it's definitely worth thinning down. Generally, most bekko bachi tend to be about 1 millimeter, so that's a good place to shoot for. However, there is no correct thickness. It's all what you like as an individual player. So your ideal thickness might be somewhere in between 1 millimeter and 2 millimeters. So test early and test often. First, we'll start with 120 grit sandpaper. Put it on the flat side of the block. And then we'll just dip this in a little water. Now we'll start sanding. Generally, we'll keep the sandpaper to about, a ½ inch to an inch, somewhere here. We don't want to take too much off of this part. There's no need. So it's mostly the edge. So let's start here, and as evenly as we can, we'll push back and forth. Let's go 5 times per side. Then turn it over, 5 times on the other. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And do your best to keep the pressure evenly across. If you push too hard on one side than the other, then this will become thinner before this side does. Ideally, we want it evenly. So before we measure again, let's do another 5 on the other side. 1, 2, Flip it over. Now, let's dry it off. We'll check with our calipers. It's gone down a little bit, so we'll proceed with another 10 on each side. Dip in water to remove some of the residue. 1. And measure again. Number's a bit lower than before, so we keep going. Okay, so we're about at 1.3 millimeters. My target is 1 millimeter, so I'm going to move on to 220. Because although these are finer, it's still going to take off plenty of material. Let's give it 10 strokes per side. 1, 2. Switch. See, that takes off quite a bit already. Now we'll move on to 320. I'm going to do another 10 on each side, because why not? 1.16. 400. So these are much finer. We don't have to worry as much about taking off too much material like we do for 220 and 320. So I'll do 20 strokes per side. $600. 1,000. 1,200. 1,500. I'm going to do this with the eraser. Now with the eraser, we'll just go to the sides. And now move it along the tip and kind of pull it off downward, just lightly. We want the tip to be sharp, but not pin sharp. Otherwise, it'll risk damaging the skin or the strings, or your thumb. Around. Now, lastly, 2,000. All right, so this is basically a millimeter. So I would say when you're using 120 grit sandpaper, stop when you're about 0.3 millimeters to where you want to end at, and then switch to 220, 320, 400, up until 2000. Now, as you can see, the part that we haven't sanded is still bright and shiny. This part is dull, but we can change that with some plastic or automotive polishing compound. Let's do that now. Let's put down a little soft cloth, have our bachi, some strips of other soft cloth, and these are the polishes I'm using. I got these in like 2008 when building my homemade mandolin. This was for polishing the lacquer, but really anything you can get on Amazon or whatnot should be just fine. We'll start with the cleaner. This is a little coarser than the polish. Apply some on here. Apply some. And apply some to the edge that we sanded. It's okay if it gets on this part too. Now have a clean cloth and rub it real hard and brisk until you start to hear a squeaky sound. Okay, that's pretty good. Next, the polish. And there we go, polished. It's still a little bit duller here than on this side, but you know, that's still gonna blind your neighbors. Some scratch marks here. If this was our final, if we decided that this was the final thickness we liked, we could remove those scratch marks by using the rubber pad and 1200 grit sandpaper and just kind of go in circles along here where the scratch marks are, just to kind of blend everything together. 1200, 1500, 2000, and then use the polish again. And then you'd have a very new looking bachi with the flexibility that you love. I'm Kyle Abbott, and that is how to sand an ice scraper.